You're listening to Packers Talk Network.
Welcome to the Packers Weekly Podcast, part of PackersTalk.com network. Excuse me. I'm your host, Miles Teddick, joined by your co-host, Tim Hamilton. We are diehard Packers fans that just love talking about the Pack. We're not getting into the national sports media headlines and all that nonsense. We're sticking with football. We're diving into the top topics around the Pack every week, breaking down games during the season and sorting through all the drama and the rumors of the offseason. If y'all want to support the podcast, please spike that like button for us. Give us a follow on all the socials and subscribe to the Packers Talk YouTube channel. All those things help us out a lot and don't take much on your part, so we greatly appreciate that. And before we get started, a few words from our sponsor, Wisconsin's own Ticket King. For over 30 years, Ticket King has been providing Packers tickets to Packers fans. You can find them on the web at ticketking.com or visit their locations in Green Bay and Milwaukee. For direct links to specific Packers game tickets, go to packerstalk.com/tickets or browse their website at ticketking.com. Good evening, Tim. How you doing, sir?
Good evening, Miles. I'm doing good. We're going into the end of the offseason here.
Pretty much.
Yeah, they got two more practices, mini camp Tuesday and Wednesday this week, and then won't see him again until July 22nd for the first day of training camp. So, yeah, this is kind of it. Our last look at the Packers until it really starts, until they really start gearing up and getting ready for the season. So, exciting couple of days. We'll get some little tidbits of information coming out of their rosters and who's available, who's not, and and then it's kind of the long wait until training camp starts. So. Yeah, it's nice to finish up the off season, but it's also kind of now you get like the real dead period where you're waiting for something. So, that in between's not always so much fun, but it gives us something to look forward to.
Absolutely. It's not very much fun, but it's also, in the grand scheme of things, not very long, right? It seems long when we're in it, but then before we know it, training camp's here, preseason's here, regular season's here, and we're in it, So, yeah, one thing that, the content creators and everybody out in the social media world and the Twitterverse and all of that, one thing they do to fill time right now is they come up with a bunch of hypothetical nonsense, right? We've talked about it. It's short season, so we got guys out there, you take a slow-mo video of them and then talk about why they're going to be in the Hall of Fame and all that.
Yeah.
So we're not going to do that. We set out to not do that kind of nonsense. Instead, what we thought would be pretty cool to try to bring the listeners and some Packers fans that are following this is a professional perspective, right? Because Tim and I, we're just fans, right? We love the game of football. We love the Packers, but we're fans, right? At the end of the day, we don't have any more information behind the scenes than anybody else, but we wanted to bring in somebody who is a professional in a topic that we've been talking about lately in this offseason, which is hamstrings. But he's more a professional in training the hamstrings, in strength and conditioning, bringing in Coach Steve Brown. If I can get you up here. Here we go. Welcome to the show, Coach. Strength and conditioning coach at UW Oshkosh. You just said you finished your 17th year.
That's correct, yeah.
Been
there a while.
Love it. And I had the pleasure of being one of the athletes that you coached. Really enjoyed my time with you, and I've actually spoken a few compliments out about you on this show as we've started talking about these hamstrings and this new Packers strength and conditioning staff versus the old one, and maybe some things that have changed and all of that. But before we get going, give folks a little background on who you are.
Sure. I grew up here in Wisconsin, outside of Milwaukee. Was involved in sports kind of all throughout my life, and had an opportunity to be a two-sport athlete at Brown University out in Rhode Island. Played football and ran track there. And after that, I got into coaching. My first coaching position was actually as a high school football coach. Spent 8 years coaching high school football at my old high school, Wauwatosa East, right outside Milwaukee. And then I got into the strength conditioning field. During the time that I was coaching high school football, I got my master's in exercise physiology, biomechanics, and then had an opportunity to become a graduate assistant strength and conditioning coach at Temple University out in Philadelphia. And a couple months into my time there, I was elevated to an assistant strength conditioning position and spent 4 years there. Then I got my first head strength conditioning coach position at the University of San Diego. Spent 5 years out there, and then came back to Wisconsin. I was at UW-Whitewater for 5 years. Then I spent 2 years in the private sector, and now I've been at Oshkosh for the last 17. So kind of been all over the country and, several different universities and whatnot. So,
Yeah, that's a hell of a journey, Coach. So now you've been at Oshkosh 17 years. That's the longest you've been at a school? Is that safe to say?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Just churning out champions too, man. It's been a fun time there since you got there.
Yeah, it has. It took a little while, but yeah, the athletic department as a whole has had some good success. Teams that I've worked with have generally done a good job, and football programs had 4 conference championships, a couple of national semifinals, and a championship game appearance. So yeah, so it's been a good tenure.
Yeah, no doubt. It's I've certainly enjoyed it as a Titan. It was fun, I guess. Even being there, I was in there in the earlier years of your tenure, I guess, and you had just come over from Whitewater where they were winning championships. So, we knew you knew what you're talking about. You just need a little time to get it going. But I wanted to jump in and get your opinion on some stuff that we've been, talking about, and obviously is very popular among the Packers fans. And the hamstring issues was a big thing, right? And so there's some feeling that those have been figured out. But what do you think? You think that the issue has been solved, or how do they solve a hamstring issue like that?
Yeah, so hamstrings are definitely one of, if not the most injured muscle in terms of, when you have muscle pulls, muscle tears, those sort of things. It's a complex situation. Typically, when you have somebody that pulls a hamstring, or especially in the kind of repeat situations, it's not necessarily the hamstrings themselves that are the issue. It's typically something either up the chain or down the chain. So in other words, like up toward the hip, the glute, or maybe down toward the knee, or something going on in that area. So it work up and down essentially the kinetic chain, and because of something going on away from the hamstrings, perhaps like oftentimes you see where the glutes may be, there's something wrong, or maybe the glutes aren't activated, and then as a result of that, then the hamstrings take on more of the stress, and the stress becomes too much, and then you get a hamstring pull or hamstrings tear, those sort of things. So it can be a tricky situation. It's not, not always right, one thing or another. Typically, the higher up on the hamstrings that the muscle is pulled, it's more severe. So there's a lot of factors, that get involved in kind of diagnosing some of those types of things and trying to figure out what maybe the root cause is. Um, but it was good to see in the case um, of Watson where they sent him to UW
Right.
to get tested out, and they found this discrepancy, and you do see that, especially when you have a number of tears or pulls, when it's a repeat situation. Maybe that hamstring just never really comes around, and then it then pulls again, and those kinds of things. So trying to get those the two sides of the body right, a little bit closer to even, if not completely even.
Right.
That's now at least you have some objective, you know, um, data showing, okay, here's some stuff that we can really start to work towards, right?
Right.
So that's, do they have it figured out?
Time will
Time
tell.
will tell, right? Yeah, it's, I guess, first of all, you're never going to eliminate every injury, right?
Right, of course.
One, you've got the violent type injuries, the catastrophic type things like ACL tears and those sort of things that um, they can often be just making a cut on the field, right?
Right.
And so, um, but yeah, the soft tissue injuries. I mean, that is something that we all in my field we try to reduce as much as possible, but um, again, there's a lot of factors that can be involved, whether it's hydration. Um, Sometimes a person could just sleep wrong,
Yeah.
and they've got a little knot in a particular muscle, and then they're performing, an exercise, or they're doing a drill, whatever it might be, and and because of that um, knot or a trigger point that is in the muscle, um, you know, th- they might just get a strain, right? So,
Right. Cause like
so
an
those,
imbalance, right? That is
right,
essentially at the root of it.
those kinds of things can, yeah, they can happen. But again, we're all trying to, get reduce, those types of injuries from happening as much as they can. And
Of course.
um, again, I've seen some things too where, people talking about the new staff has, a longer warm up period.
Well, that
And
was that was my next
will that be
question.
part of it? So,
So, how
uh,
important is proper warm up?
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it's very important, and I think maybe sometimes the casual fan doesn't understand. Maybe you know you have these um, uh, agreements, between the players' union and management, right? Um, how how long can practices be, or how what can they be doing in terms of contact, all those sort of things, right? Um, so the head coach is probably, they're thinking the most important thing is doing these drills on the field, and getting the practice in, and so they want to have, basically they want that warm up to be as short as possible so that they can get their stuff in.
Of course.
And so sometimes, whatever, the strength staff might not necessarily have um, the last word on how long of a warm up you can actually have, but
Interesting.
yeah.
Okay.
So so that again, I would say typically for me, a 15, to, well, when we're first starting out. our freshmen, sometimes our warm-ups will take like half an hour, 40 minutes, because we're just trying to teach them a lot of stuff, right? But
Right.
generally, once we get into things, then our warm-ups are about 15 minutes or so. I heard the Packers are about 20 minutes.
Yep.
So, um, I know some track coaches who have like 45-minute warm-ups.
So then let me ask this. And again, you're at UWO. You're not with the Packers. You don't have view into the things that are going on behind the scenes. But in your role, and you've been in this career for a while, you got an idea of some of the operations and how they go.
Sure.
One of the things that they've highlighted about this new staff and the warm-ups that they're adopting is that there's some position specific stuff going on. Now, do you guys do any of that at UWO, and what are your thoughts on that?
We don't do anything differently. So in my system, we have 5 different warm-ups that, and this would be like prior to a strength training workup, as an
Okay.
example.
Okay.
We have 5 different warm-ups that we do, and so if we're working, with our athletes Monday through Friday, each day of the week we have a different warm-up, and then that, let's say at week 1 we start with warm-up 1 and work through warm-up 5. In week 2 we start with warm-up 2 and end the week with warm-up 1. So everything, it kind of rotates through, so that every one of our athletes, regardless of how many days a week or what days of the week they're in for their training sessions, they're going to get exposed to all 5 of the warm-ups. Because there are some different things with each warm-up, and
Right.
we're trying to do as much, just of the actual kind of warming up,
Right.
but also there are certain exercises that we're utilizing to work on, activating certain muscles. Like I talk about the glutes. The glutes
Right.
can oftentimes be neglected, or they become dormant over time, just because of certain activities, whatever. And so they're part of our warm-ups. We're going to focus on glute activation, or we're focusing on our upper back mobility, or so each day there can be some different things involved in that aspect of the warm-ups. So we want to get our athletes exposed to all those types of things. So we try to be real comprehensive in terms of all that. And as I said, once our athletes are really accustomed to them, then I would say typically each warm-up is going to last about 15 minutes or so.
Okay. Yeah, and that makes sense. So I was a little bit alarmed when I heard that 20 minutes was considerably longer than what was going on in the past. And, I'm not a professional athlete or anything, but I am still out there running, doing stuff. And I'll say, Coach Brown, I'm 34 years old now, and I've been doing your dynamic warm-up since I was in college with you there. And I'm, knock on all the wood, largely injury-free. Little nicks and things here and there, but haven't had to deal with any major muscle injuries. And I think that's a big credit to that warm up. I've just always had it. You ingrained it into us, and I couldn't go to the gym or go for a run or do anything without doing that first. So I want to give a little bit of time for some questions that are coming in from some of the listeners. One of our listeners, R. Showers, has a good one. It says, when you have a rash of particular injury, how do you determine that it's a systematic issue versus being just a bad luck or coincidence? Or, is it tough for those coaches to lose jobs over that?
Yeah, it is. I actually pulled some data and
Okay.
preparing for this, right? So I just looked at. So there's a stat that I found online. It's called the adjusted games lost. So it places more weight on um, games lost involving starters, right? And guys that are heavily in the rotation versus guys that are not necessarily going to be playing a lot, and because it's going to probably going to affect all right outcomes to a much
Of
greater
course.
extent, right? So the stat is called adjusted games lost, and so you look at Green Bay, all right, and this is just I'm looked at 2023 and 2022. 2023, they were ranked 24th, so which is means that they had the ninth most adjusted games lost in the NFL.
Okay.
Okay. Whereas in 2022, they were sixth. So they had essentially sixth fewest, right?
Gotcha.
In terms of total games lost. So, 1 year, you can just see it. I mean, I don't know the exact total number, but just that ranking, right? You go
Right.
from sixth to 24th in the league. San Francisco, who the Packers' new strength coach is from, right, or where he's
Right.
from, right. Last year they were fourth, okay, and so least number, right, fourth least, and then in 2022 they were 24th. That now here's one, Los Angeles Rams, right. Last year they were 31st, so
Wow.
not very good, right? But in 2022, which is they played in the Super Bowl, right?
Was it
Um,
22?
I think so. Maybe
I can't remember.
yeah,
I think, but it was close.
yeah, yeah.
And
But they were first in the NFL.
okay,
So they basically went from first to last in 1 year, right?
that's a
Um,
big difference.
Now here, Kansas City, they're the team. Again, I just looked at a couple of years here, but they were the last 2 years. They were sixth last year and fourth in 2022. So, you know, just
They're
me,
doing well.
I would want to kind of know, okay, is it all the strength conditioning staff? Absolutely not. Right?
Right.
Can it be, medical staff and some of the other things? Is it coaching philosophy and what they do at practice? All those kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
Um, so, uh, but
Well,
it's
and
just, it's funny. You can go from basically first to last in 1 year.
along that line, it's interesting that you point out that the Packers did that because they obviously didn't do very well in 2022. That being the Rodgers last year and all that.
Yeah.
Had a lot of surprising success last year in 2023, but kind of having the opposite, right? So you've got less what was it, games lost or
Yeah.
something along those lines in 2022 than in 2023. You had a lot more, but what fans felt was that Christian Watson happened both times, right? Or you hear about David Bakhtiari, what's going on with him, and then you got Eric Stokes, what's going on with him, and you just see, I think, the high profile names make the issue a lot worse.
Absolutely. Right.
And to R's point, it's tough for those coaches to lose jobs over that. Now, I will go back to this and say, yes, you're right, but they also were not warming up long enough. I'm just going to say that outright. That's me saying that. Coach Brown didn't say that. Don't put words in his mouth. But yeah, so I think it's really interesting to get into this and look at this. We don't often talk about this as fans, but it is a big part of the entire equation for these teams and the development and all of that. And so one of the parts of that you had brought up before, and I'm actually really curious about your thoughts on this after you brought it up, is we're in the off season. You have the part of the offseason where guys go away from the facility. They're off, in their hometown wherever it may be, working, in some gym or working with a personal trainer out there that's not affiliated with the team. How much does that factor in to all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I believe it's a big part. So,
Okay.
one, I think, let me take a little step back, right?
Sure.
Again, for maybe the casual fan, or even for, somebody that's a pretty big fan of, let's say, college and pro football, right?
Yeah.
Um, in pro football, and now I guess you could say with NIL, it's getting closer to pro football, but
Yeah.
but in the NFL, you've got these guys that are worth millions of dollars to your organization. I think in general, medical staffs are going to be more conservative with trying to get their players back onto the field than you might see in college. Okay.
Yep.
And so, if again, for, kind of maybe the average fan, they follow the Badgers and the Packers, and, hey, these guys are playing every week, but, again, player X or player Y with the Packers is out for 6 weeks and, with a hamstrings or something, so,
Right.
I think, one, we have to understand that because of just the monetary value of these players, the medical staffs are typically going to be much more conservative.
Yeah.
And then, now I'm trying.
Well, we were talking about the role of these like personal trainers that these
Right,
guys are going out and working with in the off season.
Yeah. So, then there's this other aspect is when the Packers staff generally has their players. Now you have OTAs, right? And it's, guys come back and they're going to be training with that staff. But, but a lot of times, again, because of the monetary value of these players, I think oftentimes the professional, regardless, NFL, NBA, MLB, a lot of, these strength staffs are really trying to just make sure that guys don't get hurt, or don't get hurt like in the weight room, right?
Right.
And so, so it can be a little, what they're actually doing with the Packer staff can be, I suppose, different than maybe what they're doing with their trainers when they all have their personal guys or
Right.
Their agents, get whoever their agent is representing. Maybe those guys all work out together. Those kinds of things. So
Of course.
these guys have their own guys in the off season typically, and some of them are fantastic, and I think some others maybe don't have the necessary background.
Well, there's not really
there's
not like a way for teams to govern that, right? I mean,
correct.
These guys could just go home and work with their buddy from high school, right? And
right,
whatever. There's no stopping that. And it's interesting that you bring this up. I'm down here in the DFW area, and there's a lot of these professional guys. They go off like Von Miller. He's got a facility here now that's this professional training facility, and there's a lot of that popping up especially down here. I think in like warmer areas.
Right.
But I think about that, and I'm just like, yeah. I mean, I've worked out in some of these facilities. It's like you could just come up with anything, and tell guys this is it, man. This is going to get you stronger. And there's no way for the team to understand what you did, while you were away, and how to, I guess, deal with that now that you're back. Kind of to your point, if they did something where, maybe it tweaked a knee in a way that, they're not talking about, but it still causes an imbalance, or, any one of those areas.
Right.
Yeah, I just, it's interesting to me that the teams are willing to let guys do that kind of stuff. Now, maybe there's some stuff going on behind the scenes, some kind of approvals, and I don't know. But when you brought that up, I was thinking, man, that's just like a whole world of variables you can't control if you are a strength and conditioning staff, for an NFL team.
Correct. Yeah. And I mean, I see some things that some, pro athletes are doing that gets posted online, and I just cringe. Um, it's, a lot of, I just see stuff that just makes no sense to me. But, and so I
Do you
think
have
that,
a particular favorite that you've seen? Because there's
well,
some really
okay.
outrageous stuff out
Yeah, I
there.
mean, uh, you see some stuff like these guys they're on like a Bosu ball, and they've got like these glasses on that have strobe lights, and and it's like, unless you're um, in a you know you're in some arena where they're or a stadium where they're flashing strobe lights, and there's an earthquake going on to where you can't stand on your feet. How is that going to apply to to football, right?
I love it.
um
Yeah.
it's Some of the stuff is just so far-fetched that it just doesn't make any sense to me. But
Hey, it's
uh
entertainment at the
yeah,
very least, right?
yeah. And that's why I think, I think you can find where strength conditioning staffs, right, can get frustrated because they don't have as much of that autonomy um, when their guys are away. I think sometimes management, like, you just look at the whole situation with Tom Brady and the Patriots, right? Um, his personal trainer, was in the building all the time, and I think Belichick got a little tired of it, and then the guy, they built a facility right there so that um, he wouldn't be in the building, but Brady could just walk across the parking lot and go to his guy, right? So um, I think and then if that guy's pulling in a bunch of players and pulling them away from the team staff, right? It just kind of can create some divides and those kinds of things. But like I said, there are some fantastic coaches that guys will go to, and I think there's some that I question.
Uh-oh. Did I lose you guys? Are we there?
We got you.
There
Yeah.
we go. Okay. I think we had a little bit of a break in the stream there. Sorry about that. Never want to have a break in the stream. But yeah. So anyway, Tim, you've kind of been sitting here. Do you have any other things that come to mind? I don't want to keep you on the sidelines all night, man.
I
You have
don't
any
know.
questions for Coach?
This is great. This is great information. I appreciate you joining us, Coach, because learning a lot from you. But going back to Christian Watson, and he talked about how he has this asymmetry between his hamstrings. How common is that? Is that something that should be noticed fairly quickly, where he wouldn't have to deal with it, going on 2 years or over 2 years now, and then go see a specialist for it? Like, should they have picked up on that? Is it something you see? And once you see it, how easily or how difficult is it to fix?
Yeah. So that's not something that our staff, in terms of strength and conditioning, well, really, that's me, and then I have some students, um, but we don't do that kind of testing. I think maybe our athletic training staff, they may not do um, specific testing where they're going to generate specific numbers. But let's just, if there's an athlete that has a muscle pull, and they're working on rehabilitating, right, through some of their manual therapy, they certainly get an idea about a strength differential. between maybe the two limbs, but they're not getting necessarily raw data. And again, we're at the Division III level, so we don't necessarily have the resources.
Right.
But there are some different pieces of equipment that can be used to actually get some data. And so I would imagine that that most professional franchises, if they don't have that, they would certainly have access to something like that. Again, going to Wisconsin, okay, that could they? My guess might be that maybe now they have whatever Wisconsin has, that now the Packers have, so they can get these answers quicker, right? But yeah, I mean, obviously, you can make guesses on some things, right? When you're just watching some things, or if you're manually testing, right? You can get an idea one limb is stronger than the other, but to actually have the actual data and whatever, a 20% difference. Okay, now when we periodically test, okay, are we getting closer to where, we're even? And so I think that is probably, if it's not being used by these NFL teams, my guess is that that's something that they're all going to have in the near future if they don't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Well, and along those lines, coaches, like with the imbalance and all of that, that is one thing that I remember you talking a lot about with guys who were rehabbing specifically. If you've got a bum knee, you got to keep your other one. You got to continue working that other one, your other leg. If your right leg's out of commission, you got to keep your left leg, running strong. That kind of contributes to that imbalance, right? I mean, is there a way to when you're doing that, you have that injury imbalance. Is there a way to like almost overcompensate the other way after the injury is healed so you can catch that leg up?
And Eric, I'm glad you brought that up, because Eric
Yeah.
Stokes had the foot injury from 2022, and he said his hamstring injuries were because of his foot injury, even
Right.
though he started suffering the hamstring injuries in 2023, but because his
Mhm.
foot injury led to that.
Yeah. So when I have athletes injured, let's just say someone can't use one limb, right? They've got a pulled hamstring on their left leg, and they can't really use, right? They can't squat, right? I'm a proponent of having them do, for instance, single leg squats as an example on the uninjured leg, because um, even though when I'm training one side of the body, my brain is still sending signals to the other side. So it's going to help speed up the recovery of that injured leg, as an example. Or, if you've got injured shoulder, right? If my left shoulder is injured and I do some pressing movements with my right arm, I'm still sending signals to that left side, right? So it can help cut down the time needed to to recover from that injured side. Okay. Then, right, obviously, okay, then when you get back to using both legs or both arms or whatever it might be, we always have, we have, right, you have a lot of exercises that are whatever, both arms at the same time, both legs at the same time. So if I do a basic squat, right, both legs are being used. But we also have exercises, built into our program where we're going to do some single leg stuff. So one at a time, so that we work to get, maybe a weaker side caught up to a stronger side. so much of what we do in athletics, right? Sprinting as an example, right? You have this single leg support with each stride, right?
Right.
And so, we do a lot of work to specifically, kind of target that each leg has to independently be strong, right? And so that we can, be as fast as possible, or whatever, or make cuts and get in and out of cuts, as quickly as possible. Those sort of things.
Okay. So now there's a lot of ways that you can't answer this question, but it's kind of a fun question. I mean, so you put yourself in position of the head and strength and conditioning coach of the Packers when these things flare up a couple of years ago, right? And get the Watson injury, the Stokes injury, and then how would you have gone about figuring that out? Versus, it seems like they took at least 2 years, which included at least one offseason, and they weren't able to figure it out. I mean, what would your process have been? And again, understanding you don't have a look behind the curtain, and there's a lot of things you can't control and resources you don't have, but just kind of knowing what you know.
Yeah. So obviously it's not just the strength and conditioning staff, right?
Right.
You have the whole medical staff, whether that's team physician. You've got the athletic training staff, who are going to be, right, they're going to be the first point of contact in terms of if somebody pulls their hamstring, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, the athletic training staff is going to be that first point of contact, and so they get evaluated, and right, you get figure out, okay, this is how severe it is. You might get some sort of expectation as to how long that individual may be out. And I think there's a trend nowadays to really get movement. Let's talk about a hamstring issue, to get that person moving, rather than just rest, which is rest and ice and blah blah blah, right? There's a much more aggressive approach in terms overall, right? In terms of trying to get people back, is to get them moving. They need to be pain free, but get them moving as soon as possible, so that you don't get like the scar tissue formation and some of those sort of things. And so much of what a lot of athletes do is in the what's called the sagittal plane, right? That we're talking about running forward or back, right? Or
Right.
sprinting forward, back pedaling, those kinds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus lateral movements. Now in football, you get get a lot of lateral stuff, but in many sports, it's almost all straight
Forward,
ahead,
backward.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so again, if guys are doing their off-season stuff, and all they're doing is sprinting,
Yeah.
but not necessarily lateral work, that lateral work is really important in terms of strengthening the hips and just helping to reduce some of those overuse types of injuries, which sometimes that, like a hamstrings, it might be as a result of, again, some type of fatigue that sets in, and then the stress is just too much, right? So there are these approaches, right, that one, get people moving as quickly as possible in a pain-free situation, but integrating quite a bit of lateral movement to attack just movement quality and
range of motion.
range of motion, strengthening the hips to take some of the stress off of the hamstrings.
So what I'm hearing is you're immediately going into like fix it mode. You're not even thinking about, is this a pattern? Is this, a larger systematic issue? you're getting down on the individual's level, figuring out the severity of the injury and figuring out how fast you can get them moving and rehabbing, essentially, right?
Yeah, and I mean, in terms, is it systematic? Like as a, um, you know, again, typically, strength the athletic training staff, I would say, is generally people that are keeping track of the number of injuries, right? So, and again, you know, you review things, and certainly there are, I don't know, this past fall at Oshkosh, we had 4 or 5 ACL tears,
Ooh,
and that's probably as many as we had in the previous maybe 4 years, right?
that's rough.
Um, so um, you know,
And that's a
we,
different type of injury. I guess just to sort of
correct.
set
Yeah,
the perspective
yeah,
a little bit,
yeah.
a hamstring and an ACL, it's very different circumstances that lead to those two things being injured, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And right, again, the ACL is that's that's kind of the one that everybody dreads, right? It's going to
Right,
keep people out the longest, all that kind of stuff. And just that the severity factor, right?
right.
Versus again, and a muscle pull like you have these hamstrings or quadriceps, some of those kinds of issues, are generally felt to be, um, again, I hate to use the word preventable, but more, reduce the likelihood of those
Yeah,
with your warm up and your training and all those kinds of things. But yeah, sometimes, as I pointed out with some of the data earlier, right? Sometimes it's one year you got lucky and another year you didn't.
yeah.
And um, we had a few years back, right? We had a number of UCL, right, elbow
Hmm.
ligament issues. Um, we've had years where we saw like an influx of shoulder, the AC joint or other kind of shoulder issues. So and then the next year you don't see any, right? Um,
Interesting.
so some of those kinds of things, it's yeah, you look at that data and you look to see what you're doing, and um, I always come back. I feel like in my situation that we're trying to be as comprehensive as possible. We're trying to
Of
take a
course.
look at the entire body and integrating, these what we call corrective exercises or prehabilitation exercises to reduce, the likelihood of those injuries, and also to focus on certain areas of the body that tend to get injured the most, so that we can, you know, um, try to reduce the likelihood of those
Yeah.
injuries as much as possible. Um, but yeah, you have to look at data, um, and see, yeah, are there things that you constantly end up seeing year in year out, or are things, it's like one year it's this body part, another year it's this body part,
Yeah.
but you're doing the same thing from one year to the next.
Well, and so with your tenure at UWO, you've been fortunate to see through some of these things happening, and so I guess in that time and in some of those examples you gave, did you find that some were just kind of freak coincidence or freak series of injuries versus was there any that were due to some kind of systematic issue going on or a lack of warm up or a lack of cool down, whatever it may be?
Yeah, well, so I guess when you ask about, just say warm up as an example, right? I mentioned way at the beginning of the show, that we generally will have like a 15-minute warm up for our strength training sessions. But oftentimes on the field, either groups in the past, groups would like position groups would warm up like as a group, right? And it wasn't
Right.
as a team. Um, Now, under the current staff, the whole team warms up together, but it's about a 10-minute warm up, and I'm not on the field at practice, uh, but one of the assistant coaches who has a degree in strength conditioning, he leads the warm up, and they basically for practice they rotate between like two different warm ups, right, one day to the next. Um, but it is a little bit shorter. It's pretty much just the movement. It's not necessarily the what we call our dynamic mobility and muscle activation portion of the warm up. But then they're going into other parts of practice, like individual drills, where they're going to continue to warm up the body and go through, movement based exercises. So that becomes, kind of the extended part.
Right.
So,
And I kind of remember that, right? It's, you go through the dynamic as a team, and then, you get into your position drills, and that's still kind of a warm up thing. You're not
right.
really getting after it right away, and so that makes sense. And so with the example you gave with the ACLs, I mean,
Yeah.
4 or 5 guys, that's a lot, and
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I've been around long enough. I don't know that there's a whole lot you can do about that. I think those end up being kind of just freak injuries, right? I mean, did you find anything in those that could have been reduced or prevented?
Well, I think there were, if yeah, like I said, I think we had maybe four ACLs.
Okay.
3 of them were freshmen.
Uh,
Um, so they had not really, and this was like early in camp.
okay.
Um, so it had not really been in our program. Um, and then we also had another kind of major one was a quadriceps tear that happened in the first game of the season to one of our running backs. He was uh, coming out uh, on a kind of a flare route, out of the backfield, and had his head turned back toward the quarterback, and a
Yeah.
defender just came up and nailed him. And so that was a rough one, but again, that's not something you think you can really prevent, right?
Of course.
Um,
And so
but
I
yeah,
do think it's important to draw that difference because and shout out to some of our listeners, love these guys and gals. But there are some folks out there that say Watson's made of glass and stuff like that, and these guys that get injuries more than once. I insist that that you have to draw the difference because like what you just described where a kid just gets knocked out, right, and he, as you were describing us, yeah, he's probably turning back for the ball, right, and that's how his legs would get twisted in a way that could cause a tear, and yeah, that you just can't do anything about. But that, in my opinion, is not the same as a hamstring injury. But it is interesting. One thing you mentioned is that these freshmen is, there's a common theme there in some of those injuries. My theory with Christian Watson, at least part of it, was that he was kind of in that mode, right? Where he's young, hungry to prove himself, kind of like a young snake not knowing how to control its venom, right? Like just trying to go 120% on every single rep. Is that something that can cause guys to get injured like that?
um, well, again, yes, right. If fatigue, you know, is an issue, or here's another thing that you see with oftentimes with like those muscle strains or pulls, right? Somebody's been standing around for a period of time,
Mm.
and then now all of a sudden I have this big burst, right? Or, get extended and my sometimes you see this with hamstring pulls is the leg when it plants, it's out in front of the center of gravity,
Mm-hmm.
and rather than underneath the center of gravity, underneath your hip, and um, and then that stress, right? Again, it puts the hamstrings in a vulnerable position, and you can oftentimes see a pull occur at that stage.
Yep.
Um, uh, you know, Cold weather, again, I mean, um, if, somebody again isn't staying warm, and again, hamstrings, when you are running at top speed, that's generally when they're going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, if you're, again, either fatigue, maybe it's cold, and again, you have this high burst, or the leg is in a more vulnerable position.
Yeah.
Those are situations where you're going to tend to see those kinds of injuries occur.
And there's just, in those situations, it's just how your foot lands. There's really not a whole lot of control over that.
Yeah, and you're right. There are some of those situations, right? They're not necessarily. I mean, you can work on the technical side of
Of course. Yep.
running and that kind of stuff. Um, Again, the hydration, right? Again, we have to understand that a muscle is I would say the human body is like the world, right? 2/3 of the world is covered by water. 2/3 of the body is water,
Yeah.
right? And our muscles need to be hydrated in order to function properly. Um, and so if somebody's dehydrated, you have, I don't know, again, maybe there is this trigger point, or this knot in the muscle that for some reason or another,
Yeah.
sometimes those things occur. And that's, again, with training and all those sort of things, you're trying to take out as many of the X factors as you can.
So what you're telling me, Coach, is this is a nuanced situation, and we as fans can't make it as clear cut and black and white as we want to, right?
I don't think you can have blanket statements necessarily,
Right.
but just because, like I said, right,
A lot of factors.
you could be the least injured team, or you've lost the fewest number of guys, right, games in one year, and then you're at the bottom of the NFL the next. And my guess is that they have the same strength and conditioning staff. You basically, that the Rams in this case, right, they had the same, basically the same coaches, and many of the same players. But you basically go from the top of the heap to the bottom of the heap in one year.
There's something there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to get one of these questions from one of the listeners. We actually, Tyler Streber, I believe, Tyler, I remember you saying you're a Titan. He went to UWO. Are guys almost too in shape nowadays? I feel like the 90s, for example, guys don't have as many soft tissue injuries. Instead, you're 3% body fat now, whereas before we may have been like 7 or 8. Is there something to that where these athletes are a little bit more impressive these days? Maybe, moving faster, more explosive?
Well, I mean, I definitely think that, certainly over the last, I don't know, take a look at 60 years, right?
Sure.
You go back to, the Packers, winning all those Super Bowls, and, in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
There's a complete difference between, what professional athletes can do, right, in 2024 versus 1964, right? And so that's completely changed. Are they too in shape? I think a lot of it's kind of all relative, but again, they're definitely running faster and these guys are running 23 miles an hour on the field, right? You see some of that data, right?
It's crazy.
Yeah, right. So you have higher speed impacts, and that's again, this is going back to some of the other types of injuries. Um, the ACLs or maybe concussions or some of those kinds of things, right? And of course, the NFL is doing a lot of things to take some of those high speed impacts out of the game. But again, if guys are running faster, um, can that maybe lead to higher occurrence? I don't know. I mean, they're getting acclimated to that speed. Um, so I don't think it
It's
should
tough
be
to
any.
say.
Yeah, I don't think it should be any greater likelihood than it was, 10 or 20 years ago, right? Just
Yeah.
because if I was only used to running at 20 miles an hour versus 23, as an example, um, you get acclimated to whatever that speed is.
Yeah. So I guess in some cases there could be more like more violent collisions, but
Correct.
yeah, I mean, honestly, I would expect it to be almost the inverse of that, and obviously the injuries playing out the way they are. But as guys are becoming better athletes, in my opinion, they're becoming more prepared. Their bodies are more prepared for a lot of this stuff. Um, your balance is better. Your core strength is better. You see D lineman, 300 pounds with a six pack. It's like, good Lord.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if I don't know how that leads to more injuries, but there could be something there. I mean, like Clay Matthews, for example. I always was critical of him because his style of play was awesome to see, but it was also the reason, in my opinion, he was always injured. He's always slinging his body around in ways that leave him vulnerable. So it's kind of unfortunate when you have a player like that. It's like you just got to let him be who he is, and it's going to happen. But one thing that I'm interested in, Coach, and this is kind of a developing situation right now in college football with NIL and all of that. But as a strength and conditioning coach, how big of a challenge is it? And maybe you're not experiencing this as much at D3 level, but what is probably going on, definitely going on in D1, with these guys just rotating all over the place. I mean, is it just impossible to get a program together?
Uh, it, yeah, it definitely makes it tougher, right?
Yeah.
A guy that I um, started out in the strength and conditioning field with, um, when we were at Temple together, and he's spent basically the last 30 years at junior college out in California, and he in his situation, right, in the junior college situation, he oftentimes has his athletes for 1 year,
Mm. Yep.
and or one off season, right?
Right.
Because then they'll play like 2 seasons and then they're gone, right?
Right.
And so that can be a really difficult situation for him, right? You look at the NFL, and you're going to have your core guys that are going to be around for a number of years, but you've got probably a 30-year roster that overturns every year.
Fair point.
So, um, and once you get into the season, right? I don't know if you guys watched, what was the show on Netflix? QB1, I think it was called.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You and again, these guys they're all quarterbacks. Um, some of them are taking some pretty good hits. But basically, all they're doing, in terms of, uh, during the week with those guys is really try and get them back ready to play. They're not they're
They're not
not doing a lot
building.
of intensive stuff, right, in terms of
Right.
strength conditioning during the season, right? Um, and So, that's another factor that, they don't get an opportunity to push guys much at all.
Well, there's only so much you can do during the season, right?
Right, right. Yeah, and then the season is so long, right? So with NIL, I mean I think it's getting closer to, just in terms of, how far along you can get with people. If you've got a guy that's on there for 2 years and then they're transferring out, or you get a guy he's in there for 1 year, right? He's got 1 year of eligibility left. He comes in. Yeah, oftentimes you're not going to be able to get very far along with that person. In my system of training, I'm fortunate that, we don't see, we see kids, because we don't have scholarships, right? So you see a lot of kids that
Right.
just decide not to play anymore. But we get a lot of kids that are in for 4 or 5 years. And so we have a system that progresses them through, depending on essentially how many years they've been in the program. And it gets, a bit more complex, I guess, as they move through the program. And, if some of these college coaches have something similar, it's you can't get very far with some of these guys.
Right. Well, and on the other end of that, right? So you got college, and that is, I didn't think about JUCO. That's a good one. There's probably, I would imagine, some guys trying to learn from the JUCO programs at this point and how they've adapted, because they've been used to that turnover. But on the other side of things, in the NFL, and we've talked a lot about injuries right now, but I want to look a little bit more on the development and the positive side of things with you for a minute. One thing I think it was McCarthy was really notorious for talking about was that year 2 to 3 jump that guys make. And you mentioned an offseason being where the building is happening. So this Packers roster is incredibly young. A lot of these guys are going from year 1 to year 2, or year 2 to year 3. And we just so happen to have a Bears fan here listening that would love to know. Just curious, do you guys think your team takes a step forward this year or a step backwards this year? My biased self just is screaming a step forward, but in mentioning the window for development there with those guys that are essentially going from year 1 or 2 to 3, how much room for growth is there in that period of time, in your opinion?
I think there's can be a lot of room for growth, right? Again, especially, well, and I think you can see this at the high school level. I think you can see it at the college level, and I think you can see it in the professional level. That when you are exposed to, a program, in a, maybe a more formulated system of training, or you go from college to NFL. One, you don't have to worry about classes anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Football is now
Number
right.
one.
It's your job, right? And
Yeah.
I think in general, when a guy reaches that NFL level, they're going to be more likely to really kind of take care of their body, with the nutrition side of things, the sleep, recovery aspects, their ability to get, whether it's chiropractic work or massage therapy,
Oh, yeah.
all those sort of things, right? That we can see huge improvements from, in the first 2 years for sure, with our college athletes. And even college athletes aren't, you know, they're not eating properly.
Not even close.
Right. They're not getting enough sleep.
Pizza and beer, man.
Yeah, right. And so when you add really focused recovery stuff and into the mix, I think you can see, an opportunity for some significant improvement. The other aspect, right? Now, some of those guys, if they're in a high profile programs in college and they're playing 15 games, um, but other teams or probably most of the guys are only playing, I don't know, maybe 13 games.
Yeah.
And now you're adding another 4 games, so another third of your college season gets added
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
And then if you might play another 2 or 3 games. Um, so getting used to that extended season, um, having a year on your belt, with just the length of the NFL season. Um, yeah, I think there's opportunity for some pretty significant growth.
There's a lot of growth. Yeah. And you're pointing out, I mean, I think what you're pointing out is more of like maturity growth, right? And yeah, the season's longer, so you got to prepare for that. But this is also your full-time job now. I think it's interesting to see who does make those leaps. You can kind of see who turns into a professional versus who doesn't very much. But the Packers seem to have been pretty good at that, right? And Mike McCarthy called it out during his time, but I feel like that's held up pretty well with LaFleur as well.
Mm-hmm.
Them being the youngest team in the league last year and having the contributions they had and the success that they had, and now hopefully the success that they will see again this year. But yeah, I mean, I personally know how valuable those off seasons are, how much can be built in that period of time. I mean, you took me from like a $150 soaking wet, coach. I think I graduated like at 185. So yeah, even this kid here, you can work some development in there and maybe work a little bit of a miracle too. But yeah, I get real excited about this because even guys like Christian Watson, they're still really young. I mean, there's still a lot of room for growth there. We're seeing what they can do. You can send him down to Madison to work out a hamstring injury where, like at North Dakota State, they're not doing that kind of intensive research and discovery on that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm very excited to see what this roster can do. I think they're in a big period of development, and I'm personally pretty excited about this new staff that they brought in. Do you have any thoughts on them? I mean, I don't know how aware you are of a lot of the guys in the league versus more on the college levels.
Yeah, I mean, I took a look at the Packers strength staff, their bios, and um, 3 of the 4 coaches on the staff have uh, University of Minnesota as a common point.
Interesting.
Yeah, at some point in their careers, right?
Okay.
And they weren't all there at the same time, but again, there is that common factor. I think the head strength coach, I think he played at Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken. And then so actually and I was happy to see he does have a degree in kinesiology,
There we go.
which isn't always the case. Sometimes a former player is a former NFL player, is a head strength coach and may not necessarily have the scientific background, but has that job. But yeah, Aaron Hill, he's the head strength coach, and he does have a degree in kinesiology from Minnesota. He played there and spent time there as an intern. And then Marcus James also spent some time at. He was a studied at Minnesota.
Okay.
And then one other, Ben Schumacher, spent time at Minnesota on two different occasions during his tenure. So I think there was definitely a crossover with the head coach and then Coach Schumacher.
Interesting.
During their time at Minnesota. So, so I don't know if I don't really know what Coach Hill's philosophy is, but yeah, I mean, I think just even hearing like a lot of just the Packer fans, right? A more extended warm up, I think, that might have been something that he really fought for, right? That again, sometimes, as I alluded, right? I think oftentimes the head football coach or the football staff is thinking we need the guys when we're on the field, we need to be doing football work.
Yep.
And maybe Coach Hill, this is just conjecture, but maybe he kind of said, hey, if we're gonna try and do some of the things that you want me to do, we need time, right? So
Yeah.
So that I think that's a good thing that that they're putting in that kind of effort on in terms of the warm up, and who knows, maybe once they get into camp, that period may be
Go
reduced.
away.
You never know, but yeah. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what happens, but the guys on the staff seem that they've been around a number of different places, which is common, in coaching,
Sure.
right? You bounce from one job to the next and finding your opportunities and all those kinds of things.
One of your disciples that we talked about earlier that obviously I got to spend some time with while I was at UWO, Taylor Porter. He's bounced around all over the place.
Yeah.
So shout out T-Po. I don't know if you'll catch this or not, but yeah, he's at Oregon now, and I don't honestly can't count how many stops he's had. He's been at multiple colleges and multiple NFL stops, and so yeah, I mean that does seem to be the norm.
Yeah, and whether it's and I know with Taylor Porter, in his case. If a head coach gets fired or gets let go, the contract doesn't get renewed, they're gonna say goodbye to the
Time to move on.
the entire staff, right? Or
Yeah.
say goodbye to that that strength conditioning staff, whatever it might be. And fortunate for him, he has when those situations have occurred, he's been able to bounce back and get involved with somebody else. Yeah, he's been in the NFL with two different teams, and
Yep.
he's been at the Division I college level at some pretty big high profile programs like Nebraska and Michigan State and not Oregon.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and you've got a number of those. Do you know how many folks you have that are coaches now that came from your coaching tree, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the college level, there's probably around 10 or so, 8 to 10 guys that are, or not guys and gals, right, that are actively coaching at the college level. And we've got one of right about the same time as Taylor Porter, another former Titan football player, is the assistant strength coach with the Indiana Pacers.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
okay.
Jason Manikowski. He was a safety for Oshkosh.
Okay, so he probably was there right before I was. I don't remember.
Yeah,
that
so
name.
his last. I'm trying to think. His last season, I think, was 2007.
Okay, yep.
Which was my first year there. So
okay, yeah, I came in 08. Just barely missed him.
Yeah.
But no, your coaching tree is big, man. You've got a lot of folks out there, doing some really cool things. It's fun to follow that, and it's fun to see that level of professional, I guess we'll say, because to cover a lot of ground coming out of UW Oshkosh. I got my UWO shirt on here. So I want to give UW Oshkosh a second here, Coach. What's in store for 2024? We got some more champions coming down the pike.
So we have with football, we have another large group of incoming freshmen.
Okay.
This past season of 2023, right, we had about 90 incoming freshmen, or I should say 90 new players. A few of those were transfers, but
Wow.
it looks like it's going to be close to 100 this year.
Man.
Yeah. And the coaching staff feels that they've got some quality players, right? That they're not just getting numbers to get numbers, but they're getting quality players to commit.
Yeah.
Last year's class, there was some real talent in that group. I am really excited about a group of guys they're going to be juniors on the field.
Okay.
They're a lot of guys that they're actually their fourth year in college, but third year on the field. Great group of leaders. Some very, very talented players.
That's
And I'm excited to see, what's going to happen in the next couple years.
Okay.
There's a guy that's going to be a senior this year. He's a right tackle that pretty much every week during the off season, there were NFL scouts coming in to
No kidding.
look at him. Yeah. So,
All right.
it'll be, I think it's going to be an exciting year. Got a very tough non-conference schedule.
Okay.
Against some really good programs. We went up against Wheaton last year. We've got them on our schedule again this year. We've got oh boy, now I'm gonna draw a blank on team out in Oregon.
Linfield?
Linfield, yeah. So we've got
Yeah.
Linfield on schedule again.
All right.
Haven't seen them since the 2012 playoffs.
Oh, how
Yeah,
could you forget that game?
right,
My
right.
goodness.
Yeah. And then the WEAC is, I think, going to be stacked again.
Okay.
There's a guy that's on social media. He has a site. It's like the Hansen ratings, and he does all this analytical work, and he focuses on Division III. But he's got I think six WEAC teams in the top 30 or something in the country.
Man.
Yeah. So
That's awesome.
yeah. So there's you're not going to have any weeks off.
No.
So it'll be exciting. It'll be some great football.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the schedule here. So you got Wheaton, Linfield, and Michigan Tech. I don't know how good Wheaton is, and I know they've had some decent teams in the past. Linfield they're usually pretty good.
Yeah. Wheaton. I think Wheaton got to maybe the third round of the playoffs last year.
Okay, yeah, so they're a good team.
They're a very, very good team. Yeah.
Good team. Yeah, you don't get to the third round of the playoffs in D3 without being good at football.
Yeah.
So that's and I don't know much about Michigan Tech.
Michigan Tech, I think is kind of maybe middle of the pack of that division, Michigan Division II conference.
Okay. Oh, okay. So they're Division II?
Correct.
Oh, all right. Look at that. See, now listen, you gotta have some beef on the front of your schedule here, because then you've immediately got Whitewater after that. So, any Titans that are listening now, this is the question you want to know: are we going to beat Whitewater this year?
Hell yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Hail Titans. Love it. Love it. Well, Coach, I don't want to keep you up too late. It's getting late here. You have done almost an hour and a half with us, and I am very, very grateful. Really enjoyed this. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you joining us to give us this perspective on the strength and conditioning, the injuries, and all this stuff that's kind of coming to the forefront for Packers fans, because we've got nothing else to split hairs about right now. But I think this is valuable stuff, and then it gives us an opportunity to look at this and understand, okay, it's not black and white. You can't just say, hey, this strength and conditioning team sucks because these guys got injured a bunch this year, because the previous year they may not have had any injuries at all. So, there's just countless uncontrolled variables in that we talked about. So great perspective, Coach. Thank you so much for joining us on this one.
Thanks for having me. It was great catching up with you. It's been a long time.
Yeah, absolutely, Coach. We'll have to catch up a little bit more here soon. There's plenty we could talk about, and we'll have to have you back on. I'd love to get some more just good football information. Right? I don't want to bring up a whole bunch of nonsense and clickbait and all that in the off season. We can talk about real stuff like this. So we'll keep you close, Coach, if you're willing to come back on with us.
Absolutely, it'd be great.
Heck yeah. So, all right, cool. Well, Packers fans, thank you so much for joining us this week on the Packers Weekly Podcast, part of PackersTalk.com network. If y'all enjoyed this episode and want to support us, spike that like button for us. Give us a follow on all those socials. And please subscribe to that Packers Talk YouTube channel. All of that helps us out tremendously. And we will see y'all next week, Packers fans. Go, Pack, go!